Hey everybody, this is Manuel Delgado from Delgado Guitars, and excited to come to you again and talk a little bit about musical instruments. If you got a chance to see episode 1, we talked a little bit about the history of Delgado Guitars and our family and just what it means to do what I do and the joy of working with musical instruments and working with different types of wood and creating musical instruments and just carrying on a legacy that was started by my grandfather and great uncle, and then my dad, me, and now my oldest daughter, and my youngest is showing interest also. So just kind of the whole family. So check it out if you didn't get a chance to see it. But today we're going to talk to you about different types of wood, basically, what the woods are, what they can be used for. We're not going to be able to cover a lot. We're going to talk quite a bit, but the reason I say we're not going to be able to cover a lot is because here at Delgado Guitars, we actually make over 45 different types of musical string instruments. So, and we're going to get into those in another episode, all the different types of, or some of the different types of string instruments. But the reason I say we can't cover everything is because there's so many different kinds of woods, and depending on what the instrument is, we might want to use a different type of wood for that type of instrument to get a traditional sound. So you're going to learn a little bit about that here today, but as we talk about some of these different woods, I'll try to put them into context as to what type of instrument I'm referring to. So for example, I might show you some woods and I'll say this is a good wood to use for ukuleles or for guitars, or this would be really good for violins or for mandolins or Irish bouzoukis or whatever it might be. So we're going to try to give you some of that information, but the main thing I want you to walk away from today is just a little bit better understanding about the woods, maybe where they come from, what makes them unique and special, and some of the qualities that we look for here. I want to remind everybody that as we get into some of the other episodes, and I'll try to make sure I say this before everyone, what I'm talking about here is my technique, the way I go about building, and quite honestly, some of the stuff that was taught to me from my father and my grandfather, things that I've learned on my own. So I'm not assuming that the way I do everything is the only way that you should be doing things. This is the way that we go about doing things. These are the ideas and the values and I guess the principles and things that we bring to how we do it. There's plenty of other people out there that have a different way of doing it. We all might be different. Some might be better. Some may not be. But there's a way to learn from all of these things. So again, it's really important that I say that because I don't ever want people to assume that because I'm saying this in some way I'm insinuating that maybe somebody else's way of doing something isn't correct. So anyways, I just wanted to get that out of the way. So today we're going to talk about what makes a musical instrument, what makes a guitar, what makes a ukulele, what makes a vihuela, a guitarrón. I mean, all these different string instruments that we have the fortune of getting to work with. And I have a whole bunch of different species of woods here. And they can all be used in so many different ways. But we're going to just show you a little bit of what they are, ways that we use them, and just some of the different techniques that we use. So the way that I always start, and let's say for example, pretty much any instrument for this matter that we build here at Delgado Guitars, we always start with building a neck. Now, the neck of the instrument is, for those who don't know, when you're playing an instrument, the neck is the part that you hold and where you play, and it has a fretboard on it, and it'll have frets. This one doesn't have them on, but it'll have frets. They're usually nickel, or they can be stainless steel, Evo gold. There's all kinds of different frets that you can use. But the first thing that we usually build is the neck. Now, if this is for an electric guitar, this particular one, and if you're curious, since we are talking about woods, this has African ebony on the fingerboard. And it has, this is actually an old piece of Douglas fir on the headstock overlay. This has got abalone shell, but the neck itself is roasted maple. Okay, But let's say we were talking about more of like an acoustic instrument, whether it be a ukulele or a concert classical guitar. Well, the way we would start off, it would look a little different. It would look, well, actually, it would look like this. And I'm going to be moving around a lot here because there's too much stuff to fit it all on one bench. But this might be what you would see if you came in here and saw me getting ready to make the neck on an instrument. Now, this particular piece of wood right here is roughly about 70, 80 years old. And this is Honduras mahogany. Now, for necks, again, depending on what kind of instrument, you can use mahogany, whether it's Honduras mahogany or African mahogany. You can use roasted maple or maple, hard rock maple. There's all kinds of different types of maple. You can use cedar on some instruments. You would use cedar. Walnut, like on a banjo neck, or even some steel string guitars, they'll use walnut sometimes. But one of the more popular woods that you'll see is mahogany. This particular piece, like I said, is Honduras mahogany. And this is a piece that I save only when we're doing really high-end instruments. We have other Honduras mahogany, but this piece, because it's so old, I really like to save it for those. So, and what you'll see is, again, the way that we do necks here is we do what's called a two-piece neck. Now, that means that the angle and the neck that will receive the fingerboard is all one piece, and then the block where the heel and everything is carved out of is the second piece. So from here we would cut out our necks, and then they're going to look something like this right here, okay? And from this piece we would add a block like this. This would get added back here, and then this is pretty much what it would look like as we got started. We glue this up and we'd set it aside, okay? In some cases we might make it all one piece, okay? So this is one piece, all of this right here. Nothing was glued. This is all one piece. And from here we'll carve out the neck and make all of our adjustments. Now, I say one piece, but it actually has some inlays going down the center that run all the way through. But that would be what you might look at if you're looking at, like, banjo necks are really something that you would find that has just a one-piece neck. So anyways, that's an example. This is actually a piece that's going to be for a steel string, a custom steel string guitar. So from our one-piece or two-piece necks, after they're glued and they're set aside, then the next thing that we do is we'll start working on the top. So again, we would clamp this and set it aside. I'm going to just set it over here, and then I'll show you what some of the steps might be later on that. Now, before we get to the tops, I want to talk to you about something that we call a book match, okay? I've got my little notebook right here to show you. Now, when we get wood, we get it in big blocks like you saw right here. They usually call this board feet. And this piece right here, it just depending on what the piece is, we might get something that is, let's say, 10 inches wide, and maybe it's 16 quarter. And what 16 quarter means, it means that it has 16 quarter inches, okay? So to make it simple, if I said it's 4 quarter, it's 1 inch, because it's 4 quarter inches. If it's 8 quarter, 2 inches. If it's 16 quarter, it's 4 inches. Okay, so anywhere in between there. So whenever you're looking at board feet and they talk about quarter, 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarter, 4 quarter, now you know what that means. And then you have the length, of course, and the length can be, we have some pieces, 12, 16 feet long boards, and it just depends on what it is that we're dealing with. And then from that board, we can look at it and we can cut out the different sections of what it is that we want to make. So sometimes I'll actually get a piece of wood and I'll just lay it over here and I'll just look at it, and one day I'll see something in it that inspires me, and then I decide, okay, that's going to be the back and the sides for this type of instrument or whatever it might be, because there's some really cool design or figure in there that speaks to me. But when we get the wood, if we're using it to make sides and backs, it'll look something kind of like this, but a much longer piece. And then from there, we go through and we cut out the pieces that we want and what we're going to use. Let's set this here. Now in this case, I'm talking about tops. So tops can be made out of a lot of different types of wood, again, depending on the instrument. If we're talking about a guitar, like a classical guitar or a steel string guitar, then traditionally you're going to pretty much find spruce or cedar. Now, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, there's two choices. Well, no, there's not. Because within each species, there's actually multiple choices. So, for example, if you were to say, hey, Manuel, I want a spruce top, I wouldn't be like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. Well, then I'd say, well, what kind of spruce do you want? Do you want Sitka spruce? Or do you want red Carpathian spruce? Or do you want Adirondack spruce? Or do you want German spruce? Or do you want Italian spruce? Or do you want Swiss spruce? And do you want, Engelmann spruce? I mean, there's so many different kinds. So we would talk about the different types of species that there are within that type of wood. And then let's say you said, okay, all right, oh my goodness, I'll take the German spruce. Okay, good choice. And then I'd say, what grade do you want? And you'd be like, oh my gosh, where does this end, right? So and within the woods, they grade them differently. So we use on all of our tops, we like to use master grade. And master grade means that it's basically the cleanest, straightest lines, the best selection of that particular tree that was cut that they use to cut out to get that wood from. Okay, so let's say if we're talking about a spruce top, then what you're going to look at when you first see the top, it might look something like this. Now, this is a piece of Sitka spruce. When we get the wood, as I mentioned, it's really thick. We'll actually cut it on a bandsaw, a big saw that cuts down the wood for us into very thin strips, a little bit thicker than what you see right here. From this point, then we will plane the wood down to where it's a little bit more easy to work with, and then we'll use a planer, and we're able to do a book match, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Now, as you're looking at this piece, you can see that there's some stuff right here down the middle. Okay, this is actually two pieces of wood glued together, and they're joined down the center. What you're seeing right here is some dried glue and a little bit of newspaper. So when I glued it, I wanted to make sure it didn't stick to whatever the board was that I was gluing it. But what a book match is it's the same piece of wood, and then it's cut in half, or a section is cut off, and then it's joined down the center. So just like you open a book, okay, that's the same way that we do our pieces, and it's called a book match. So you see that there? And this is a really great example. This is koa, which can be used on some tops, but this is good to use as an example because the figure is so pronounced. If I was using a piece of spruce or cedar, spruce and cedar is pretty straight grained and somewhat, I guess, subdued compared to this type of wood, and you wouldn't really be able to notice what the value is of doing the book match. By using this piece, you can see how the grain matches, okay? So when we do that book match, again, the same piece of wood, ran down a bandsaw, and then planed, and then book matched down the center. Now you have a balance. This side is going to match this side. And we do the same thing whether it's the sides of the instruments or the back. Again, keep in mind, we're talking right now about the majority of string instruments, because if we're talking about a violin or a viola or a cello or other instruments, some of those instruments might use just a one-piece back on the back. They might just use one piece of maple, okay? So some of them use a book match, some of them don't. So it all varies. But if we're looking at a piece of spruce, we book match it like this and join it. Now, I'm going to show you another couple of examples here. You'll see what the piece would look like after it's been joined. So again, 2 pieces of wood glued down the center, Bookmatch, and it's hard to tell, but if you look really close in there, you might be able to see the grain and how straight those lines are and how fine those lines are, and that helps give you an idea of why that balance is important by doing that Bookmatch. When I explain what Bookmatch is and why it's important to folks who are not familiar with musical instruments, or if they're interested in that, I tell them the reason it's important is because by doing this, you've created a balanced canvas. Okay, you've given me or whoever the builder is an opportunity to now brace the top and to get different tones, different sounds out of it. And what I don't have to worry about is the fact that the top is out of balance before I even start. So if this was one solid piece, let's go back to using this as an example. Let's say our piece that we were working with, this was going to be the whole top right here. You see how the grain varies from one side to another. So we would have to work with overcoming that imbalance. But when you have a balance like this, now I can I have a blank canvas that gives me balance from the left and the right side. They're equal, and then I can brace it to get the different sounds and tones that I want, and I don't have to worry about that grain changing from one side to another. Now this would normally be a solid piece like this, but what we do is after we Bookmatch the top, then the next thing we do is we inlay a rosette like this, okay? And this rosette is inlaid with little pieces of wood that we create. It's called the rosette. The rosette is inlays of strips of wood. Sometimes we'll use abalone shell, mother of pearl. We're going to get into some of the custom stuff that we do in another episode, but this gives you an example of what that looks like. And to show you, I have some little pieces right here, and you can kind of get an idea. These are all little individual pieces of wood. Let me hold that steady right there. If you look at that right there, those are little individual pieces of wood that were created and then cut into like little mosaic tiles. And all of those tiny little pieces are what you see in the center here. And again, it is wood. It's not a decal. Some mass-produced instruments are decals. Ours are not. And the other pieces are just strips that we bend and shape to get different looks out of it as well. So it might be something just really simple like this. But those are some of the strips, the dark color strips that you see that go around there. Now, after the top is inlaid, and whether it's, this is a white spruce, or if it's Carpathian spruce, like this piece right here, or if it's German spruce, like that one right there, or if it's Spanish cedar, like this one right here, okay? We do different inlays. And the inlays aren't gonna determine the sound, it's just to add a level of beauty to the instrument, make it striking. There are some pieces that are important, and I'll get into that later. But the rosette themselves is just to give you like a focal point, something to really look at and admire. Okay? After the tops are inlaid like that, the next thing that we would do is usually while that's gluing, we put this aside, and then we would come back to our neck. And our next step on our neck would be to shape the neck like this. And you can see this is all done by hand. We use chisels and knives. This is for a classical guitar. This would be right here. This has got an ebony inlay that's been put in there. You can see right here where that black heel was glued on there, and this is a separate piece, but this right here is all one piece right here. And that's the neck. And then the next step might be we might want to do something like put our inlay over there and just kind of give this a little bit of decal and decorative piece right here. We call this a headstock overlay. So But after the neck is shaped, then we go back to the top and we brace the top. And you can see here's an example of what bracing might start to look like when we're doing this. Now the bracing is important for a couple of reasons. One, it has to give strength and stability to the top. But if you over brace the top, then you kill the tone. The top is basically a drum head. It vibrates. So just like a drum, if you were to put your hand on it and try to strike it, you would get a very muted tone. You want it to be able to vibrate. But if you make it too loose, not strong enough, then the top could warp, it could break, all kinds of stuff could happen. So you have to find a balance. And depending on which instrument you're making is going to determine how you brace it, and what sound you're trying to get out of it would also determine how you're going to brace it. Now for a concert classical guitar, one example for a good wood combination would be like spruce on the top. I personally like German spruce or Swiss spruce. Those are really beautiful types of woods. Italian spruce on the sides and back, a rosewood. So maybe it's Indian rosewood, Brazilian rosewood, which is an endangered species, so it's hard to get now, but that's a beautiful wood for a concert classical. We might use ebony on the fingerboard, Honduras mahogany on the neck, so those kinds of combinations. After the top is braced, the next step that we would do is we're going to work on our sides. Now, depending on what we're working with, now this right here would be the next step. Our sides are, again, Bookmatch, same piece of wood. And then what we do is to bend these, we actually use a pipe with heat. And this pipe right here, I'll put an iron inside of this, and this thing will get up to 400 degrees or greater. And I'll clamp this down, and once this gets to the right temperature, the sides have been wet, and then we'll put it on the iron one at a time, and the steam that's created from that heat will allow me to bend and shape the wood to whatever shape I want to make. We do that mainly just on the sides. There are some times with some other steps on the instrument where we might use the side bender, but it just depends. And then the wood that you use for the side is pretty much always going to match what you have on the back. In some cases, some people might mix it up just to do something unique, but whatever you choose for your sides and your back are going to be the same. And the same thing with the, so like here's an example of a ukulele. This is a koa, and this is koa on the back also. And this particular instrument was made out of the same piece of wood, so the top and the back would match. You can see right there. This is a good example of what it looks like when you have a block of wood. So you might have a block like this, and you're going to cut out a piece so you can book match it. So when you cut it out, that thickness would get cut out. You could fold it over, and then you can book match it. And that's what it looks like when it's book matched. You have that beautiful balance right there. After the sides are bent, the top is connected to the neck, and it's placed on the face, and then the sides are put on, and then the next step would be to book match the back. I'm skipping so many different things, but this is just to kind of give you an overview of how it all works. The back is put on. The back is braced first, of course, and then different steps for inlaying, for securing the sides and the back, putting binding on, different things like that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, which is easy for me to do because our main focus today is just talk about the different kinds of woods. So this is striped ebony. Striped ebony can be used for fingerboards. It can be used for sides and backs if they're used at the right thickness. Another thing I want to talk about is the importance of the sides and the back. There are a lot of builders who think that the woods that you use on the sides and the back of an instrument, and let me explain what sides and back are real quick. So if you have an instrument, this is the top right here. This is the side. This is the back. This has what we call a cutaway. The neck is right here, headstock, fingerboard, frets, machine heads or tuners, the nut, the saddle, the bridge, strings, this outside part right here, the binding, the inlay on the inside here, purfling, rosette. As I mentioned, this is a cutaway. This is called a Venetian cutaway. A Florentine cutaway would have a point to it. It would come to a point. And I think that's it on the different parts. So when we're talking about woods for the sides and the back, I was saying a lot of builders think that the sides and the back don't necessarily play a part in the sound of the instrument. That's not what we believe. That's not what my father or my grandfather believed. When you play an instrument, especially if you play one of ours, a lot of people talk about how they can feel the instrument, the vibration of the instrument. And believe it or not, that's not true on a lot of instruments. So we believe that the way that the sides and the back are sanded, the thickness that they're made to, the way that we brace them, all play a part in the tone of the instrument. And even the types of woods that we use. We think all of those things are important. And the builders that don't believe that, well, that's fine. Like I said, everybody has a different idea. And I've had young folks who are considering building instruments, and they always ask me that. Do you think the sides and the back play a part in the sound of the instrument? And I always tell them, well, if you think they do, or if you think they don't, then you're right. Meaning, if you think it doesn't play a part in it, then the way you build, you're not going to take those things into consideration, and they're probably not going to help the tone of your instrument. I think it'll personally hurt your tone. But if you think it does, then you're going to think about that when you're creating that instrument, and it's going to give you the sound that you're looking for, or maybe even surprise you with the sound that you're looking for. After the sides and back are all put together, the next step would be putting the fingerboard on an instrument. This one's pretty close to being towards the end of the steps here. This is a custom concert classical guitar that we're building for a client. This client requested it with a cutaway, and then they asked for some unique features like a bevel on the top. You can see that right there. So when they're playing, they don't have that sharp edge on their arm. They wanted it to be comfortable. So you have your top, rosette, sides, and back. This would be the steps that I would jump into next. We would do the purfling, which is that decorative inlay there, and then the binding, which is this inlay along here with the binding and the little white wood inlay as well. But then the next thing would be you would glue a fingerboard on, and then after the fingerboard is glued on, you would make a bridge and build the bridge on. So the next steps for this particular instrument is after we get this neck angle straight where I want it, which is pretty much there now, I'll sand this fingerboard down, and then I'll start to put in the frets, or what I like to do, I'll shape the neck, shape the headstock, and then make a nut for it, make a saddle, put machine heads on it, and string it up without having had the wood completely sanded, without having frets on it. And then I'll let it sit for a few weeks, and it starts to vibrate. I'll put it in front of a speaker maybe, so it's getting different tones that it's vibrating to. We call them sympathetic tones. And then the neck will start to kind of settle in. And then at that point, once I look down the neck, if everything looks like it's right, then I'll put the frets on, and then take everything off of it, sand it down, and then we start to go through the finish process. One of the cool things that we do, like in this particular instrument, because this is being made for a client, we're actually going to have this customer come down and play this instrument before it's been completed, because he can tell us, he'll play it, and he might say, you know what, I want the neck a little bit rounded, or I want it a little thinner, or you know what, I like the way that feels, whatever it is that he says. And while he's here and playing it, he can hand it to me, and I can just thin the neck down while he's waiting, sand it, hand it back to him, he can try it again. So those are some of the cool things that we get to do because we're such a small shop, and because we do everything custom. We're not mass producing instruments. So, but anyways, that's this particular instrument right here. So after that is all done and the finished process is done, it has to dry for a couple of weeks, and then we wet sand it and we buff it out. Again, everything that we do is very traditional because we're an old world luthier. So we're using techniques that a lot of people don't do. We use a finish that takes a little while to dry, and we choose to buff them out by hand instead of using machines. All of that is because we don't put so much finish on the instrument that it kills the tone. a real heavy finish, cures faster, dries faster, can be buffed out with a high-speed buffing wheel because it won't burn through it. But it's so heavy and thick that it can kill the tone of the instrument, and we don't use those types of things. So again, koa, one of the types of woods that we use from Hawaii. Koa can be used on ukuleles, it can be used on guitars, on a myriad of different instruments. Spruce, I talked about all the different kinds of spruce. Cedar, talked about some of the different types of cedar. Spanish cedar, Western red cedar, all kinds of different types of cedars that can be used. The sides and back. Hardwoods are what you normally want to use if we're talking about a guitar for the sides and back. And hardwoods as opposed to tone woods. So a spruce or cedar would be considered a tone wood. In some cases, you might see mahogany or koa if it's a steel string guitar on the top as well. But those are normally used for sides and back. Hardwoods would be rosewoods, any of the rosewood family, and there's so many. Babinga, which is African rosewood, Palo Escrito, which is Mexican rosewood, Brazilian rosewood, Palo Santo or East Indian rosewood, and then like I said, there's striped ebony, there's cocobola, there's, oh my gosh, there's so many different ones. Maple, you could use maple for the sides and back. You can use ziricote for the sides and back. So there's all kinds of different hardwoods, and they're called hardwoods for that reason. They're a lot more stiff. They're stronger woods. They tend to have a lot more figure or character to them, like this. And typically on tops, you usually want something that has straight grain, which you'll find more in spruce and in cedar. And then a lot of these hardwoods can also be used for the fingerboards. So that's where using like ebony, different species of ebony, Macassar, African ebony, all the different kinds. Rosewood can be used on fingerboards. Sometimes one of the species that comes from rosewood, or like granadillo. Granadillo is very oily, but a lot of times it's used for fingerboards. Again, so many different kinds. It just depends on what it is that you're talking about. And we already talked about necks. So you put all these different combinations together. And sometimes, if you're not sure what they do, some people will experiment and try different things, and they'll get different tones. I've been very fortunate to have grown up in this world and learned from my father and my grandfather. And I've seen what works, and I've seen what we think doesn't work. So there's certain things that we just choose not to tackle because we've already kind of been down that path, and we get an understanding of it, and we know that it's really not going to produce what we're trying to do, what our goal is in the end. I'm trying to think of which other, oh gosh, we use on tacote on vihuelas and guitarrones and mariachi harps and guitarras de golpe. These are all musical instruments from Mexico. The other thing that's important when you're talking about traditional instruments is knowing that they didn't have eBay, or they couldn't go online and buy whatever it was that they wanted. People used the woods that were available to them where they were. So again, going back to koa, if you're in Hawaii, they're going to use koa because that's what's from that island. It's a native species of that island, and that's why we see some of the slap key guitars or ukuleles or taro patch as an instrument, all these different types of instruments that come out of Hawaii, and they use koa. If you're looking at, I mentioned some of the mariachi instruments, well, they're going to use cedar or palo escrito, which is Mexican rosewood, and then they're going to use tacote on the top, different things, different species like that. So looking at those traditional instruments, you're going to find things that they use was because that was available to them. Charango, if you ever look at an instrument from El Salvador, now they pretty much make the backs out of wood, and it's like a bowl back, but the traditional ones, they actually used armadillos. And that's not a type of wood, that's an animal. So they literally would kill these animals, and they would use the shell of the armadillo for the body. And when you're looking at charangos, if get a chance, you can investigate these online and look for different images. They're going to come in different sizes. Why? Because the animal came in different sizes. So you might see a little tiny body like this, and you know, the whole instrument might be about a little bit shorter than this maybe, or about this long. Or if it was a bigger one, it might look larger, just depending on what the size of that instrument was, or that animal was, and that's what they made it out of. A lot of gourds. Look at sitars and different things like that, and you'll see different sizes as well available. So, but yeah, it's super exciting. Like I said, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more that we could talk about. But I'm going to try to share a little bit of some of the maps, maybe, so you can see where these are coming from. Hopefully, we will have some of those images that you've gotten to see, and then there's always just an opportunity if you're wanting to find out more, just research. That's one of the beautiful things that we have now is you can go online and you can research some of these different trees, the characters about those trees that make them unique to whether it be for a musical instrument, or even sometimes they're used for certain types of furniture or certain types of structures for a certain reason. So some folks took a lot of time to think these things out in the days when they were building whatever it might be, and there's usually a pretty good reason behind why they're using what they're using. There's a story behind it, which is super cool. If you take the time to research that and learn about it, it's just really interesting to see what it is that you know, oh wow, they use this kind of wood because they found that it was going to have more stability, and they had tried this other one and that didn't work, or you know, whatever the story might be, whether it's a musical instrument or they were building a bridge or whatever the story is behind it. So I don't know, I'm personally fascinated by a lot of those things. I think it's interesting to see why somebody came to that conclusion. And then people look at that, they learn from it, and they'll either go to the next steps, or some people will challenge it. Sometimes they'll say, well, maybe they did that for that reason, but I'm going to challenge it and see if I can maybe use that anyways and come to a different conclusion. Sometimes they do, sometimes they realize that the energy and the thought process behind it was basically brought them to the same conclusion that they came to, and it was something that they learned from, but maybe they ended up spending a lot of time, whereas if they had just followed that traditional model, they would have realized that there's a reason why those woods were used. Maybe that produced the best sound or gave the best end results. So anyways, I hope you guys have learned something today. There's so many different things that we learn when we're working with the wood. I always feel like the wood kind of talks to me in the sense of, if I'm planing it and it's wanting to splinter, I feel like it's saying, oh, you're going the wrong way, turn around. So I'll turn the piece of wood around and kind of go with the grain. Some woods, I feel like they are just designed to be a side and a back because of the beautiful pattern and the grain and what they can offer. So then my challenge is, wow, I really love the look of that wood. How can I use it but still get the most out of it, because the end result has to be the sound and the tone. So it's really, for me, it's there's this respect and this connection to working with all these different species, all these different types of woods. It's not just parts, they're not just pieces to me. One of the things that if you look at our poster, and you'll find on our website, there's a quote that was found, I think it was in a 15th century viola, and it was in Latin. And unfortunately, whoever wrote it, they never put their name to it, so it's unknown. But we translated it and we put it on our website. And it says, I was alive in the forest, I was cut down by the cruel axe. In life I was silent, but in death I sweetly sing. And I think about that a lot when we're working on these instruments, because I have the fortune of working on an instrument, creating something from God's creation, from Mother Nature, and turning it into a musical instrument. And then that instrument will go out into the world and has the potential of living on for many, many, many years after I'm gone. and touching other people's lives and influencing them with the art that's produced from it, from the musician who's performing with it, or the songs that she might play or sing from it. So I don't know, I think that's pretty awesome. But I hope that you'll follow along on our YouTube page, and we look forward to bringing you some more episodes, teaching you a little bit more about what we do. And if you have any questions, always shoot us a question on our YouTube page, or you can email us, and we'll do our best to answer for you and try to help you with whatever your question might be. But I just want to thank you for sitting through this, and I hope you learned something from it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we look forward to bringing you some more information soon. So until then, God bless you, and like I always say, may God bless all you put your hands to.